Hi, my name is Imbi Neeme and I'm the author of The Spill. Really thrilled that Gold Coast Libraries has asked me to talk to you today about myself and my book and my writerly journey. So I hope you're sitting comfortably, and I'm going to do a short presentation and then I'm going to answer some questions that Gold Coast Libraries have sent through to me. So I'm going to drive this using my technical know-how, wizardry. So forgive me for any mistakes or blunders I make along the way. I'm just going to adjust my size of my image a bit because for some unknown reason I end up being teeny tiny, like size of a postage stamp. So I am the author of The Spill, which won the 2019 Penguin Literary Prize. People are saying that it's my debut novel, but it's actually not my first novel. My first novel I actually wrote in 1976 when I was 5 years old, and it was published in my school school magazine. And I remember the satisfaction and deep pride I had from writing this book. And it took a few years before I was able to look back and go, it wasn't a book, it was actually a single sentence. And here's the sentence. The funny planet. One day, a man went to a planet and explored it, and a rocket came, and a funny turkey came out and asked if he would join in a party in his rocket. I always remembered it as being an alien coming out of the rocket ship, which probably would have made more sense. So I was kind of surprised and sort of actually quite delighted when I recently got hold of a copy of this and saw that it was a funny turkey, and a funny turkey with the turkey spelt with a capital T. Just feel like I was really inventive and kind of, bending genre even then when I was 5. Anyway, I was hooked. I was hooked from an early age on writing. And that showed during my teenage years where I journaled every single day. 8 years from when I was about 12, 13 till the end of university. And this is an actual photo of my actual journals. Thankfully for us all, only a handful survive. But yeah, that was 8 years of it's basically word vomit. At the end of that, I went to live in Japan by myself for 2 years while I taught English. And during that time, I wrote an earnest and probably quite terrible novella on Apple, what was it called? MacBook 150, PowerBook 150, like this, which is actually more house brick than it is computer. And I remember writing that and showing that to my dad, whose opinion really matters to me, and him reading it and saying to me, Imbi, I think you found your bliss. And that was a really profound moment for me. It was when I really started thinking of myself as a writer. Now, unfortunately, I then entered a 12-year kind of black spot where I did pretty much zero writing, save a couple of assignments that I did as part of a screenwriting unit. I did it while I was living in London. And during that time, I tried to have a career. I had 3 children. I've also got married. So I'd been pretty busy. And it was when my youngest child was about 4 that I started to write these long sort of humorous anecdotal posts on Facebook. And a friend pulled me aside and said, have you ever thought about starting a blog? And I said no, and went home and Googled what is a blog, and then Googled how do I start a blog? And then I started blogging at Not Drowning Mothering. And it was about 2011. Oh, actually, no, 2008. And I blogged for about 3 or 4 years. During that time, I generated something like 270,000 words. That's 500 posts. I was blogging 4 or 5 times a week. It attracted 50,000 visitors, 500,000 views. It was pretty successful. And all this while, I was writing it with some small children kind of dangling off me like Christmas ornaments. And that was actually a very good thing, because what it taught me was, well, it helped me develop this muscle, this writing muscle, which allowed me to write in short, sharp bursts, which I still continue to do to this day. I don't have a lot of time in my life. I've got 5 teenagers, 2 stepdaughters and 3 sons, and they sort of come and go like cats, and our whole life is run by Google Calendar. That's the boss of us, and I also work as a university administrator in a 0.7 job, and so just 7 days a fortnight. So somewhere in between chauffeuring kids and managing house and doing my job, I find these little moments of writing time where I write quickly and I write hard. Now with the blog, I stopped it in 2011 because I had gone through a divorce, and this life that I'd been sharing online and with strangers suddenly felt really personal, and it was too painful to share in that way anymore. So I stopped. And I also stopped because I think the entire time I was writing my blog, I had this idea that it was going to lead to me writing novels. And I did get some attention from publishers, but they were non-fiction publishers who wanted me to turn the blog into a book. And that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to write novels. So I decided to push the blog aside and embark on the long game. Now, in 2013, in a restaurant in downtown Dublin, I sat down and wrote the very first paragraph of my very first manuscript. It took me almost a whole other year before I wrote the second paragraph of my first manuscript, but that's neither here nor there. This photo, which actually has my son on the left-hand side, waiting to kind of properly photobomb the picture. It was taken in 2018, which was 5 years after I'd written that first paragraph, and 3 manuscripts later, one of which was actually the first draft of The Spill. And I, at this point, was still 9 months away from winning the Penguin Literary Prize. I mean, I had no idea that was even on my horizon. So how did I get there? How did I get from writing that first paragraph in a Dublin restaurant to winning the Penguin Literary Prize? Well, I like to say to people, submit, submit, submit. I always tell people you've got to stand by your work and you need to put it out there. And I, judging from my submission spreadsheet here, you can see that I put it out there a lot. This was a way I had of tracking when I sent stuff out to, or submitted to prizes or competitions, submitted to literary agent or publisher. It tracks short stories and my 3 manuscripts, and also sort of residency programs that I apply for. Everything went into the spreadsheet. And you can also see on the left-hand side, there's a long column, which is mostly grey. The grey represents where I was not successful. The yellow is where I got longlisted or shortlisted, and the greens are my successes. And those, I think those greens were successes with short stories. So you've got to understand that behind every success, there's a lot of rejection, and I always find that a really important thing to tell people, that it's not all winning Penguin Literary Prizes. But I did win the Penguin Literary Prize, hooray! A lot of people ask me the question, like, where was I the moment I found out that I had won? And the answer to that question is it was a Sunday afternoon. Now, anyone who's ever submitted into a competition or to a publisher will know that when that turns 5 o'clock on a Friday, there's a little part of you that sort of like, withers and is sad, because you're entering the weekend where there are no important emails. That email that you're checking your email every 5 seconds for is not going to arrive. So it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was sort of just checking my email idly while my stepdaughter was explaining the plot of The Shining to her younger sister. And I opened the email from Meredith Curnow, the publisher at Penguin, who had previously emailed me telling me that I'd been shortlisted. And I, because I wasn't expecting it to be the email from the Meredith Curnow, I sort of opened it without even thinking. And then I read her first sentence, which was, how do you feel about winning the Penguin Literary Prize? It's like, rather coy email. And I gasped so loudly that my eldest stepdaughter stopped and said, "Oh, sorry if I spoilt the plot of The Shining for you." And I was like, no, I've won. I've actually won. And just for the record, Meredith, I felt really, 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 really good about winning the Penguin Literary Prize. Anyway, we immediately abandoned our plans for the day and went out to lunch to celebrate. And during that luncheon, I went to the little ladies' room, or whatever we like to call it. And I saw my reflection, and I was smiling so much that I thought, I have to take a photo to capture this feeling, this winning the Penguin Literary Prize feeling. This is the photo. You can see there that there's a lot of emotion, a lot of big feelings. And I had to sit on that feeling for a couple of weeks because there was a period where I wasn't allowed to tell anyone, and that was pretty hard. You can tell that emotion would have been pretty hard to bottle in. But then on the 17th of March, I flew to Adelaide, and at the Leading Edge Books Conference, I was announced as the winner. As we walked into the event, Meredith, who I'd only just met in person, turned to me and casually asked, like, "Oh, do you want to say a couple of words?" And I was really surprised, because no one had mentioned that I would need to make a speech, and I thought I was just going to get up on the stage and just wave cheerfully, and that would be that. But I was going to decline, because as a writer I like to write things down on the page. But then I saw the room was full of booksellers, and I thought, these are the people who are going to be, selling my book in the future, and this is where it begins. This is where my capital A author journey begins. So I've got to step up, and I've got to do this. So when my name was announced, I stood behind the lectern and spoke into the microphone and babbled incoherently for, it felt like hours. It was probably only a few moments. And then at the end of my speech, I waved cheerfully at the room and said, "Nice to meet you all," like that, in that tone of voice. And I could already see the headlines, suburban mum wins literary prize. And my kids still tease me so much about it. So anyway, so that was March 2019. And then I entered quite a rigorous editorial process, which people are always a bit surprised, like, "Oh, you won the prize, surely they wouldn't change a thing." And no, they didn't change much. They certainly didn't change the structure or the story, or make me get rid of any characters. But there's still a lot of work to turn a manuscript into a book. And so then we're going to cut forward. I'm not going to relive that pain. Cut forward to April 2020. So by now we're all in lockdown. COVID-19, you might have heard of it. And a box arrives. And at this point, I had thought that maybe I wasn't going to get published after all, or it would be delayed, or they would use the paper for the book to print toilet paper instead. And then this happened. Now,
what's up there, Imbi?
I think it's not.
It's like Back to the Future. Hey, George, this just arrived. What is it?
It's
for you, Mr. McFly. It's for you, Mr. McFly. It's for you. What is it? What is it?
So that's what it's like to hold your book for the first time. So then, now we come to the spill. What's the spill about? Actually, no, the first question people tend to ask me is, does it really come with a complimentary cup of tea? And the answer, sadly, is no, it doesn't. Once we kind of push past all that disappointment about no free cup of tea, the other question people like to ask me is, what inspired the book? And that's a hard question to answer, because there's so many things that go into making a book, if you can think of the most complicated recipe in the world, it's like that, so many ingredients. But I had to reduce it to one key ingredient. It was this memory of a car accident that I was in when I was about 10, when I was in the accident with my mother and my sister. And I remember we were waiting alongside the road for the ambulance to come, and I looked back at the car and it flipped on its side. But where I was looking at it, it looked fine. And I actually thought, oh, we'll be okay to drive home in that. And then later when we went to see it and where it had been towed, I saw that it had been completely wrecked. And in a way, that's what it was like for me in that accident. On the surface, I was fine. I had a couple of bruises. I had a couple of stitches. But actually, the impact of that accident was much deeper than I probably realized until years later, because that was a very defining moment for me in terms of changing how I experienced the world. And I became really interested in exploring those moments, you know, the little moments and the big moments upon which an entire life can pivot. So I began to reimagine that accident with two fictitious sisters and their mother in the accident, and started asking some questions like, where have they come from? Where are they going? Why did the accident happen? And what happened next? So that was the starting point of the book. The other thing people always ask is, what is it about? Well, obviously it's about two sisters, or maybe it's not obvious. I'm the one who wrote it, so I know it back to front, but you haven't read it yet. So it's about two sisters. And look, my elevator pitch, which I have never ever done in an elevator, is no two sisters. Oh, no, that's not correct. Gosh, yeah, I'd probably be booted out of the elevator. So no two people ever experience or remember the same thing in the same way, especially when they're sisters. So yeah, so that brings me to the themes of the novel. The first one is sisters. What a fascinating relationship that is. And there's so much material. I have two sisters. I have lots of friends who are sisters. I've been collecting these stories over the years of miscommunications and misunderstandings, but also this kind of fierce loyalty and like deep abiding love that comes with that relationship. So I really wanted to write about that. And I also wanted to write about memory, because I became, as I've gotten older, I'm going to be 50 in a few months, I've started to realize how there's a gap between what I actually experienced at the time and what I now remember. And those memories that I have of those experiences have slightly twisted and bent out of shape so that they fit the narrative that I tell myself about what happened. So that gap between experience and memory, I really wanted to explore that. And then the third thing was kind of an accidental sort of theme, not something that I set out to write about, but that I came to write about, but through the development of the characters, and that was about alcoholism. And I didn't want to write a judgy book, which is like alcohol is bad, because it can be very bad for some people, but other people have a sort of a more sort of easy relationship with it, or a controlled relationship. So I wanted to look at all those different variations, but not in a kind of judgy way. And then the other thing that I was really interested in doing is structuring it, not in a linear way where you go from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, but in a different way where I treated the whole story like this big jigsaw puzzle where I'm handing the reader one piece at a time from different parts of the puzzle, and slowly they're piecing them together to form the larger picture and of these two sisters and their lives and all the moments that have kind of defined them. So that's what The Spill is about. Thank you for having me, Gold Coast Libraries. But I'm not going just yet because we're lucky. We're going to have some questions. I'm going to stop sharing because I'm really good at this technology stuff, and I'm going to move over to the questions that have been sent to me. Now, some of the questions I've actually already answered in my presentation because, you know, it was a very good presentation. So then one of the questions is, in terms of their family dynamics, are the Coopers, who are the family that I'm writing about, typical? And like, I would say yes. I think in every family there's always secrets and intrigues and and misunderstandings, and it's just the nature of being a human being. We're not straightforward creatures. We have all these kinks in us, and you know, the Coopers, with all of the secrets, they're small and large, that they've been harboring, are very typical, I think, of other families. So yeah, I really enjoyed getting to know all of the family members, and imagining what sort of skeletons, there's no actual skeletons in the book, I should say, that they were harboring. And yeah, just as I said, I've just always been interested in collecting stories. And, you know, whenever I see a friend, I'm always asking, like, how's your sister, or how's your brother, or like, how are your parents? And just love hearing stories. So apologies to all of my friends whose stories that I've slowly cannibalized in this book. Okay, another question. What advice do you have for budding writers? Well, I think I've covered a little bit of that by saying submit, 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 but that's certainly the advice that I often give, because I think, you know, you're not going to get published if you don't put yourself out there, and it's a really, even though you may get rejected, you will get rejected, and you're going to feel sad, and it's important to let yourself feel sad and throw yourself that little pity party. You need to keep going and keep writing. And I think that brings me to the main bit of advice, which is don't write to get published or to win prizes or to, you know, win competitions. I mean, they're really wonderful things, but I think if you're going to write, you need to write for the love of writing, and don't lose sight of that, because getting published is actually a very difficult journey. But as long as you still have that love of writing, you're going to be okay. How have you been spending lockdown, and where are you right now? Well, I'm in cold Melbourne. I'm not on the Gold Coast. And incidentally, I just want to say we spent, my husband and I spent our honeymoon in the Gold Coast earlier this year in January, and had the most marvellous time. We were there with our kids for 1 week, and then a week without our kids. And anyway, so I'm waving to you all and saying thank you for such a wonderful honeymoon, because you're all personally responsible for my happiness those 2 weeks. So I have been spending lockdown working. So I work for university, and I'm still doing that work and spending a lot of time in meetings and, you know, working on my spreadsheets. And I would like to say that I have written, you know, my next great novel, but that first month of lockdown was incredibly hard to focus and write. And anytime anyone told me about Shakespeare writing King Lear while he was in lockdown, it kind of just made me a bit punchy and feel very inadequate. And so the last month I've been spending a lot of time doing some publicity stuff for the book. It turns out that getting published is a really involved thing, and there's lots of things to do. So I've been doing that, but I've been grateful to have my house and my family at this time. And anyway, hope you are with loved ones. And anyway, I'm getting teary now. So and then what other writers inspire you? I read quite widely, and I used to have like favorite authors, but these days I think that the writers who inspire me the most are actually my writer friends. I've had so much guidance and support from them over the last sort of however many years since I've been writing novels and trying to get published. And they've just kind of kept me afloat, and I'm so grateful for their friendship and their patience with me. So I really, if you are writing, having other friends who are writers, because, you know, they get it. It's really important to have those people to kind of bounce ideas and share your disappointments and your successes with. So what are you reading at the moment? Well, I'm actually reading and listening to two things. So I'm listening to The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, because I, like a lot of people, I'm doing a lot of walks, and the way that I incentivize exercise and housework is by listening to audiobooks. So I've been enjoying that. And I'm about halfway through Bram Press's The Book of Dirt. And I used to read lots and lots and lots, and I find it very hard these days to find writing. Yeah, I find it hard to find writing time, but I also find it hard to find reading time. Because did I mention the 5 teenagers? God, they eat so much. Anyway, but I'm enjoying both of those things immensely, and I have a to be read pile about this high, because I just decided that the best thing for me to do during lockdown was to support local bookshops and buy lots of books that I would never have time to read. So I can see the headlines now. There'll be university administrator crushed by her own good intentions, because that pile is going to come down on me at some point. So just wait to read about it. And then what's next for Imbi Neeme? What are you looking forward to? I'm looking forward to having time to write something new. I've got this burning idea for a fourth book, which is, all I can say about it is it's something to do about postcards. But I just haven't had the time or space to write that yet. But I'm really looking forward to that day that I can sit down and start to put that story down on the page. Anyway, thank you, Gold Coast Libraries. Thanks so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk to you and tell you my strange stories, and show off my mad PowerPoint skills. Take care and stay safe and stay well. And thanks again. Now I need to work out how to stop this thing.